Welcome back to the third segment of Civil Discourse Now. This is February 25th, 2012. I'm Mark Small, co-host Paul Ogden.
Mark?
Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Doing quite well, thank you.
Good.
We're discussing whether the United States is biased towards Israel. Our guests are Jeff Cox and Kurt Lorey. We're coming to you from Big Hat Books in Broad Ripple section of Indianapolis. It's on the north side. Neat books here. Crimes in Southern Indiana for one. This is a locally written book about local events. There's going to be a book signing here by Dan Barton on his book, The Next Right Thing, which
I was sad that he's not running for re-election. Dan Burton.
No, this is Dan Barton.
Oh.
Now, Dan Burton is a local congressperson, and he's...
no comment.
Shirley. That's not serious.
Don't call me Shirley.
Barton...
we need to apologize to Mr. Barton.
Barton is having Mr. Barton, it's supposed to be an excellent book, and he is doing a book signing here at Big Hat, 6510 Cornell Avenue, on March 8th at 6 o'clock here. And there's a gallery of paintings out here by the G.C. Lucas Gallery that's really great. It's in Broad Ripple, and this is a great place.
Before we go on to that, we might want to talk about next week's show.
Next week's show.
Yes.
Next week's show, we're going to talk about Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday.
Wait a minute. Is there a trademark on that? Is there a trademark on Super Tuesday? It's like an R.
Right. Maybe you just need to get a flashcard that has a little R on it when you say it.
Super Tuesday. And we'll talk about the state of the presidential primaries. Oh, it's primary. There's really only one primary going on. It's like who's going to run against President Obama. And so it's like...
You said the state of the presidential... Is that one of the 57 states that Obama talked about
earlier? Oh, that's silly. Gosh, don't go there. We're talking about the Middle East now, the Middle East region. And I think that Kentucky might get a first seed. But that aside, we're talking about the Middle East, the United States, whether it's biased towards Israel. And Kurt mentioned when we were off camera, Zionism actually had a strong beginning, or a strong... In the mid-1800s.
In 1870, there apparently was some kind of organization that sprung up that had a big, World Zionism Congress. And that really predated Theodore Herzl.
Is that the World Jewish Congress?
Nope. Nope. It was something, there were 4 words, and I can't remember one word, but it was World something Zionism Congress, I think.
And so the idea of that was to go to Israel. That's what they called it, Israel. And it was to go home as a place of refuge, because at that point they're being persecuted in many places. They're being persecuted here in the United States.
Well, it was a historic goal of the Jews to return to Israel. Ever since the Second Diaspora began, they had like a closing that at mealtime they'd say next year in Jerusalem. So they had as a society decided they wanted to return to Israel. That goes back all the way to the Second Diaspora.
Well, and that's, I mean, I can understand that. I'm a Cubs fan because we say next year, and I'm not meaning to be facetious about anything, but I can understand lost hopes. But they actually then, a lot of people moved to Palestine, especially as discrimination became even more marked in the 1920s, because World War I happened, there was a vacuum of power, the economy crashed in Germany, and actually came back up because the German economy was doing quite well under the Weimar Republic in the mid-1920s. The United States was loaning money to Germany so that they could pay war reparations to Britain and France, and then the United States economy collapsed, the world economy collapsed, we cut off money to Germany, and whereas Hitler's party had polled 2.8% in 1927, by 1932 he was elected, he would have been prime minister, he was elected, he
became chancellor.
He became chancellor of Germany,
Yeah.
but that was...
They had a plurality in the Reichstag, but they did not have a majority.
And that was where the gross, overwhelming acts of genocide occurred against Jews.
Yeah, with the Holocaust, not only in Germany, but in Poland and in Russia as well.
And
I think you'd want to call it industrial.
I said on my blog it was industrialized genocide. There had been incidents of genocide before. Here in the United States, we used blankets and gave them to the indigenous tribes with smallpox.
Oh, that's a myth.
No, it's
That's
not.
a myth. Yeah,
Or
that's a myth.
and in Turkey, they committed genocide against Armenians.
That is
after.
Don't tell Turks that.
Well, but the Turks have acknowledged that, I think.
They fight that tooth and nail.
Okay, well, but there have been instances of genocide,
Sure.
meaning that there were specific groups that ethnically, religiously, whatever basis, were systematically destroyed. The Germans just did it in factory style, and I don't mean to go into ranking systems, but really, Nazi Germany was probably third historically in mass murder, because second was Stalin in sheer numbers. I think he had 38 million.
At least.
And number one with a whole bunch of bullets was Mao. He killed probably about 50 million of his people, and Mao was a Maoist. He was not a communist. He said, "What is good for me is good for China." And he was on.
Mao was a Maoist?
Yeah, he
Go
was-
figure.
I know. No, he was a solipsist. But that brings us to then Jews were being turned away from the United States. They couldn't immigrate here, even as they were being put to death in Germany. They were trying to seek refuge here. They were trying to seek refuge in Britain. All these places were turning them away, but they knew that they could try to get back to the homeland. And Britain actually had a mandate there and prohibited them from entering Palestine. And that's where, and you watch the movie Exodus, they're coming ashore at night and trying to get into Israel and seek refuge there. So there's a big move. They go from about 8% in 1900 to about 40% by 1940. 35% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. And that presented problems because there were already people living there. And so you have these people who have been discriminated against and persecuted for nearly 2,000 years. They've just gone through mass genocide. Nobody will take them in. Nobody will give them relief. In fact, Roosevelt didn't want to be viewed. He didn't want anybody to know about the death camps because he was concerned that people here would think that we were fighting World War II for Jews. And so he didn't want us to say very much about death camps because he's afraid it would hurt the war effort. And so what else were they going to do for refuge as a mass of people? And they weren't going to move back to Germany. I mean, Germany was in... Or Poland. Or any of the countries from which they'd come, or Soviet Union, which had been Russia. Nobody wanted to live in Russia. The Russians didn't want to live in Russia. So they went to Palestine, and there were people living there already. And that was when problems began, because there had been in 1917 McMahon Pledge signed by Britain promising Palestine as a Jewish homeland. And in 1916, Britain had also issued the McMahon Pledge, which promised Palestine to people who were living there, who were Arabic, as a nation state. So you had British ambassadors kind of like talking
Well,
about...
you mean the first one? You're talking about Balfour.
That's what I was
Balfour.
wondering.
I'm sorry,
Balfour
I screwed up. I saw your expressions. Yeah, Balfour, I apologize. McMahon Pledge was the first one, and Balfour's declaration was the one that promised a Jewish homeland. And so you have both people claiming documents, legal documents, saying, well, this is our land, and then you have Zionism saying this land is ours, was given to us by the big guy. And nobody talked about the Canaanites who could say, well, wait a minute, we were living here before then. But all of a sudden, the modern state of Israel begins to evolve, or begins to erupt, begins to form.
Well, I think
Coalesce.
Britain took the mandate in Palestine at the end of World War I to prevent the French from taking more than they wanted the French to take. But that involved getting involved in there. And though I think in Great Britain there were two huge camps that were completely separate. One siding with the Arabs and one siding with the Jews. And that's where you get these conflicting. It just depends who's ascendant in the Foreign Office at any particular time.
Well, part of it's also because no one wanted to be under French rule. The Arabs in the Middle East who were living in Syria in particular, they're like, don't give us the French, please don't send the French over us. Well, the French came over, and the British took over part of that territory in order to block the French. It's true, but the Arabs would rather have the British there, and they made that clear, than the French.
Well, they did in 1920, but by the time
Yeah.
1940 rolled around,
Oh yeah, no.
changed their mind.
Actually, they wanted the Americans in there too, and the Americans didn't want any part of it.
So,
There's another pendulum that swung.
so at that point, there were groups in Palestine, for example, Menachem Begin's group, the Irgun, that were carrying out acts that I don't see how you can say that they weren't terrorism, acts of terrorism.
And they weren't the only ones.
There were
several fringe groups, like Harut.
There was
another one.
There was the Stern Gang as well.
Yeah. So there's multiple factions that splintered away.
And Menachem Begin, for example, his group blew up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, and one account said that there was the silhouette of a human body on a building next to where the hotel had stood because the explosion was so great. And these were groups who were trying to found the Jewish state. We're not talking about Palestinian terrorists. We're talking about the Irgun, which was using terrorist tactics, and they were terrorists in trying to establish Israel. And so then there was the United States was the first country to give de facto recognition to the state of Israel. I believe that was in 1948. 12 minutes after the United States had given de facto recognition to the state of Israel, Israel declared itself a state and said, well, we are a nation state. And that was, but there was a very real concern because by that point you had several countries around there, Jordan, which was Transjordan at the time, Egypt and Syria in particular, and Iraq, who did not, who, for various reasons, wanted parts of Palestine, and also they were warring with each other.
Well, Israel. Britain was pulling out of Israel by that time. They had had enough of it. They wanted nothing more to do with it. And so it was going to be without a government. And basically what the Stern Gang and others did, that they declared that, we are the government, we are a state, recognize us, and that's what the United States did. Britain wanted no part of it at that point.
And then the Israeli state that formed had certain laws that were put into place to effectuate acquiring more land for Jewish residents. For example, if you were absent from your home, your land could be taken. And that meant if you were going to the market, your land could be taken. There were laws that were on the books.
Well, a lot of those laws were the result of the war of Jewish independence, the war of Israeli independence that came about in 1948. What Israel looked like, are we getting close to a break?
Yeah, we're right out of break. So hold that thought. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
The economy took off. We had the 8 greatest years of industrial production increase in our history.
It's right at the end of the segment. My worst would include W, and I have to think for a second about the other one. We'll be right back.